The morning I found the severed copper line buried in my backyard, I knew my life in Maplewood Heights would never be the same. 3 inches of precision-cut pipe lay gleaming in the dirt like evidence at a crime scene. My hands trembled as I traced the damage with my fingers. This was not an accident. This was not wear and tear. Someone had deliberately destroyed my geothermal heating system. But here is what Corinne did not know when she took her hacksaw to my property. She did not just cut the line that heated my pool. She severed the connection that kept warmth flowing to 5 homes in our neighborhood. She cut the heat to 80-year-old Mrs. Peterson, whose arthritis medication barely worked without her heated floors. She killed the system that warmed the Johnsons' newborn nursery and kept the Martinez family's elderly father comfortable through his chemotherapy treatments. In 30 seconds of vandalism, Corinne had declared war not just on me, but on half the neighborhood. What she could not have predicted was how spectacularly that war would backfire. Because when you attack a mechanical engineer who has spent 15 years designing systems that bring communities together, you better make sure you understand exactly what you are destroying. 6 months before Corinne tried to destroy my life, I was the happiest homeowner in Maplewood Heights. My name is David Chen, and I am a mechanical engineer who spent 2 decades designing HVAC systems for commercial buildings. When my wife Sarah and I bought our dream house on Elm Street, I saw an opportunity to create something special. Our neighborhood sits on top of a natural geothermal zone. Most people would never notice it, but I could feel the Earth's warmth radiating just 8 feet below the surface. Instead of installing a traditional pool heater that would cost hundreds of dollars each month to operate, I designed something revolutionary. I spent months mapping the underground utility easements that connected our properties. These legal corridors run beneath 6 houses on our block, including mine. The previous homeowners had signed agreements decades ago allowing shared access for utilities. Most people forgot these easements even existed, but I saw them as the foundation for something beautiful. My geothermal system worked like the circulatory system of a living organism. Heat pumps extracted warmth from deep underground and circulated it through a network of insulated pipes. The main line started at my property but branched out through the easements, providing supplemental heating to my neighbors' homes. Everyone benefited. Everyone saved money. Everyone stayed warm. Mrs. Peterson next door was the first to notice. She had lived on Elm Street for 40 years, and her heating bills had never been lower. The radiant floor heating in her kitchen and bathroom helped manage the arthritis pain that kept her awake at night. Across the street, the Johnson family was expecting their first baby. The gentle warmth flowing through their nursery floor made those 3 a.m. feedings more comfortable for everyone. The Martinez family at the end of the block had been struggling with their elderly father's medical expenses. The reduced heating costs meant more money for his treatments. Even the Hendersons 2 doors down noticed their basement stayed dry and warm for the first time since they moved in. For 5 blissful months, my system ran perfectly. I maintained it religiously, checking pressures and temperatures every weekend. The neighbors brought me cookies and thanked me for thinking of the community. Sarah joked that I had become the neighborhood's favorite engineer. Then Corinne Morrison moved in across the street. Corinne arrived in Maplewood Heights like a storm system moving across previously calm skies. She bought the old Victorian house that had been empty for 2 years and immediately began what she called improvements. Within her first week, she had measured every property line, photographed every fence, and taken notes on every house that did not match her vision of suburban perfection. I first met Corinne on a Tuesday morning in October while I was checking my pool equipment. She marched across the street with a clipboard and a scowl that could freeze water. "Excuse me," she said, not bothering with introductions. Are you aware that your pool equipment violates at least 3 HOA covenants? I looked at my setup with confusion. The heat pump was painted earth tone brown to blend with the landscape. The pipes were buried underground. The control panel was mounted discreetly behind a privacy screen. I am not sure what you mean, I replied. Everything was approved by the previous HOA board. I have all the permits and documentation. Karen clicked her pen like a weapon being loaded. Well, I am the new HOA president, and I am conducting a comprehensive review of all property violations. You will be hearing from me soon. She turned and walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in my backyard wondering what had just happened. I had no idea that Karen had already decided my heating system was her first target. I had no idea she was jealous of the innovation that brought our community together. Most importantly, I had no idea that she would stop at nothing to tear it all down. The first official notice arrived 3 days later. Karen had hand-delivered it to my front door at exactly 7 a.m., timing her visit to catch me before work. The envelope contained 5 pages of typed accusations, each more ridiculous than the last. Violation Notice 1. Unsightly mechanical equipment visible from street view. My heat pump was barely visible behind its screening. Violation Notice 2. Unauthorized modifications to approved pool design. The system had been part of the original pool permit. Violation Notice 3. Potential noise disturbance from mechanical operations. The heat pump was quieter than most air conditioning units. But it was Violation Notice 4 that revealed Karen's true intentions. Suspected unpermitted utility modifications affecting neighboring properties. Karen had done her homework. She had somehow discovered that my system extended beyond my property lines through the easements. What she did not understand was that those connections were completely legal, protected by agreements signed long before either of us moved to the neighborhood. I called the HOA management company to schedule a meeting. The property manager, Janet, sounded exhausted when she heard Karen's name. Mr. Chen, I have to tell you, Mrs. Morrison has filed 14 violation complaints in her first month as president. She is very thorough. Thorough was not the word I would have chosen. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen conducted what she called inspections of my property. She arrived unannounced with a tape measure, a camera, and a notebook full of questions I was not required to answer. How deep are these pipes buried? She demanded, standing in my backyard like a detective at a crime scene. Why do you need to know that? I asked. Because I need to determine if they comply with local building codes. They do comply. I have the engineering reports and city permits to prove it. Karen wrote something in her notebook with aggressive pen strokes. We will see about that. She was building a case, document by document, photograph by photograph. But she was not working alone. Karen had recruited 3 neighbors who barely knew her to support what she called her Community Improvement Initiative. The Wilsons from Oak Street attended every HOA meeting now, nodding along as Karen presented her findings. Mr. Phillips from 2 blocks over had never spoken to me before, but suddenly had strong opinions about my unauthorized equipment. What I did not know at the time was that Karen had a secret motivation driving her obsession with my heating system. While she publicly claimed to be protecting property values and enforcing HOA rules, she was privately planning to install a luxury pool in her own backyard. I discovered this 3 weeks into her campaign when Sarah overheard Karen talking to a pool contractor at the hardware store. I need the biggest, most impressive pool design you have, Karen had said. Money is no object. I want something that makes the neighbors jealous. The contractor had mentioned heating costs, and Karen's response revealed everything. "That will not be a problem. Once I get rid of the competition, I will have the only heated pool in the neighborhood." Karen saw my system not as a community benefit, but as a threat to her own status. She wanted to be the neighbor with the impressive amenities. She wanted to be the one people envied and admired. My heating system, which helped everyone save money and stay comfortable, was an obstacle to her vision of being the neighborhood queen. Her harassment escalated daily. Violation notices appeared on my door like clockwork. Karen demanded copies of every permit, every engineering report, every approval document related to my system. She scheduled emergency HOA board meetings to discuss what she called the Chen property situation. But Karen made one critical mistake in her investigation. She focused so intensely on finding legal ways to force me to remove my system that she never bothered to understand how it actually worked. She saw the heat pump in my backyard and assumed it only heated my pool. She noticed the underground pipes and thought they were simple pool plumbing. Karen had no idea that cutting one line would affect 5 families. She had no idea that my system was the invisible thread holding our neighborhood's comfort together. She had no idea that her planned sabotage would turn the entire community against her. Most importantly, Karen had no idea that attacking a mechanical engineer's life work was about to become the biggest mistake of her entire life. The legal consultation Karen demanded took place on a cold Thursday morning in November. She had insisted that the HOA hire an attorney to review my heating system and determine whether it violated any covenants or local ordinances. I arrived at the community center with 3 boxes of documentation, feeling confident but exhausted by months of harassment. Karen sat at the head of the conference table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. She had organized her accusations into a presentation complete with photographs, measurements, and legal citations that I was certain she had copied from internet searches. "As you can see," Karen announced to the attorney, "Mr. Chen has installed an unauthorized utility system that extends far beyond his property boundaries. This clearly violates our community standards and potentially creates liability issues for the HOA." The attorney, a patient man named Robert Hayes, reviewed my documentation for nearly an hour. He examined the original easement agreements, the city permits, the engineering reports, and the HOA approval letters from years past. Karen tapped her fingers impatiently as he worked, clearly expecting immediate validation of her complaints. Finally, Mr. Hayes looked up from the documents. "Mrs. Morrison, I have reviewed everything, and I need to be very clear about something. Mr. Chen's heating system is completely legal. The easement agreements explicitly allow for shared utility infrastructure. The city permits are valid and current. The original HOA board approved this installation with full knowledge of its scope." Karen's face went through several colors before settling on an angry red. "That cannot be right. There must be some violation, some code he has broken." "I am afraid not. In fact, Mr. Chen's system appears to be a model of community cooperation and environmental responsibility. Any attempt to force its removal would likely result in legal action against the HOA for harassment and breach of the existing easement agreements." I felt a moment of relief, thinking Karen's campaign had finally ended. I was wrong. What I saw in Karen's eyes that morning was not acceptance or defeat. It was the cold calculation of someone who had decided that if she could not win legally, she would find another way to win. The meeting ended with Karen storming out of the room, muttering about getting other opinions and finding real legal experts. Mr. Hayes quietly advised me to document any further harassment and consider filing a complaint against Karen for abuse of her HOA position. That night, I thought the worst was over. I called Sarah at work to share the good news. We made plans to celebrate with dinner at our favorite restaurant. I even considered sending a friendly note to Karen, hoping we could find a way to coexist peacefully in the neighborhood. I was naive to think Karen would accept defeat gracefully. Over the next week, Karen's behavior became increasingly erratic. She stopped attending HOA meetings. She canceled the monthly neighborhood newsletter she had started. Most tellingly, she began asking strange questions about my heating system's exact location underground. Mrs. Peterson mentioned that Karen had knocked on her door asking about utility line locations and whether she knew exactly where Mr. Chen's pipes run through the easement. The Johnson family told me Karen had offered to pay for a survey of their property lines, claiming she wanted to help neighbors understand their boundaries. On Wednesday evening, I saw Karen talking to a man I did not recognize in her driveway. He was carrying what looked like metal detection equipment and a small shovel. When they noticed me watching from my kitchen window, they quickly moved their conversation inside her house. Thursday night, Sarah and I went to bed feeling uneasy about Karen's behavior, but not imagining she would cross the line from harassment to actual crime. We had lived in Maplewood Heights for 3 years without a single problem. Our neighbors were good people. Our community felt safe and supportive. Friday morning changed everything. I discovered the sabotage at 6 a.m. during my routine system check. The main heating line had been cut cleanly through, 3 feet underground, at the exact point where it entered the shared easement behind my property. The precision of the cut was unmistakable. This was not accidental damage from a utility crew or natural line failure. Someone had deliberately located and severed the primary connection that supplied heat to half our neighborhood. I stood in the hole I had dug to expose the damage, staring at the clean copper cut and feeling a rage I had never experienced before. Karen had not just attacked my property. She had attacked every family that depended on the warmth my system provided. She had declared war on our entire community. But as I knelt there in the dirt, examining the evidence of Karen's crime, I realized she had made a fatal miscalculation. She had assumed that destroying my system would only affect me. She had no idea that within hours, 5 families would be calling me, desperate to understand why their supplemental heating had suddenly stopped working. Karen had just turned every person she hoped to impress into a victim of her sabotage, and that mistake was about to cost her everything. The phone calls started before 8 a.m. Mrs. Peterson was the first to contact me, her voice shaking with pain and confusion. "David, I do not understand what happened. My floors are ice cold this morning. My arthritis is so bad I can barely walk to the kitchen. Is something wrong with your heating system?" Before I could explain, the Johnson family called. Their newborn had been crying all night in the suddenly cold nursery. "We do not want to bother you," Linda Johnson said, "but our baby's room is freezing. The floor heating just stopped working sometime during the night." Then came the call that broke my heart. Maria Martinez was crying as she explained that her elderly father, who was recovering from his latest chemotherapy treatment, had spent the night shivering in his bedroom. "He is so weak already, David. The cold floor is making everything worse. Please tell me you can fix this soon." I spent the morning making emergency calls to heating contractors, while simultaneously beginning my investigation into exactly how Karen had sabotaged my system. The evidence was damning and extensive once I knew what to look for. My neighbor Tom Henderson, who worked night shifts as a security guard, provided the first breakthrough. "I saw something weird Tuesday night around 2 a.m., he told me. "There was a guy with a flashlight in the easement behind your house, had some kind of equipment with him. I thought maybe it was a utility worker, but now that you mention it, the timing seems suspicious." Mrs. Peterson remembered more details when I spoke with her again. "Karen came by Monday afternoon asking all kinds of strange questions. She wanted to know exactly where your heating pipes run under my property. She even asked if I had blueprints or survey maps. I thought she was just being nosy, but she seemed very interested in the technical details." The smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Karen's handyman, a local contractor named Mike Rodriguez, approached me Wednesday afternoon looking nervous and guilty. "Mr. Chen, I need to tell you something," Mike said, glancing around to make sure we were not being overheard. "Mrs. Morrison hired me last week to help her locate your heating pipes. She told me she needed to know exactly where they ran so she could avoid them when installing her own pool system." My blood went cold as Mike continued his confession. "She had me use a metal detector to trace the lines from your house through the easement. We marked the locations with spray paint. She said she just wanted to be careful not to damage them during her construction project." "Did you cut the line?" I asked directly. Mike shook his head quickly. "No way, man. I just found them for her. But Tuesday night she called and said she did not need my services anymore. She said she had handled the situation herself. I did not think much of it until I heard what happened to your system." The final piece of evidence came from my own security camera system. Sarah and I had installed cameras around our property after a rash of package thefts the previous year. The camera covering our backyard had captured everything. Tuesday night at 2:17 a.m., the infrared footage showed a figure moving carefully through the easement behind my house. The person carried a small shovel and what appeared to be a hacksaw. They worked methodically, digging down to the exact location Mike had marked with spray paint days earlier. At 2:43 a.m., the figure stood up, gathered their tools, and walked directly toward Karen's house. The video quality was not perfect, but the person's height, build, and distinctive winter coat matched Karen exactly. More importantly, my security system had captured audio of the metal cutting. The rhythmic sawing sound lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the time it would take to cut completely through a 3-inch copper pipe. But Karen's sabotage was even more calculated than I initially realized. As I investigated further, I discovered that she had spent weeks researching my property and my family's background. She had pulled public records about our mortgage, our income, and our previous addresses. She had researched the market value of homes in our neighborhood and identified mine as one of the most valuable properties on the block. The shocking truth emerged when I found Karen's conversations with real estate agents. She had contacted 3 different realtors asking about motivated sellers in Maplewood Heights. She had specifically asked about properties that might come on the market quickly due to HOA problems or neighbor disputes. Karen's plan was diabolical in its simplicity. She would make my life so miserable with harassment and sabotage that I would eventually give up and sell my house. She would then use her inside knowledge of the HOA to purchase my property at below market value, claiming it had utility issues that made it less desirable to other buyers. Once she owned my house, Karen would have access to the geothermal system that she secretly envied. She could maintain it for her own benefit while blocking any other neighbors from connecting to it. She would have the exclusive heated pool she wanted, along with the most valuable property in the neighborhood. But Karen had miscalculated on every level. She thought destroying my heating system would only affect me, not realizing that half the neighborhood depended on it. She thought her sabotage would remain hidden, not knowing about my security cameras. Most importantly, she thought I would react to her attack by giving up and moving away. Instead, Karen had just provided me with everything I needed to destroy her completely. And unlike her cowardly midnight sabotage, my response would happen in broad daylight, with the entire neighborhood watching. The morning after I discovered Karen's plan to force me from my home, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting her directly or trying to handle this situation quietly, I was going to make sure Karen faced the full legal consequences of her actions. She had committed serious crimes that affected multiple families, and she was going to pay for every single one of them. My first call was to the law office of Patricia Williams, a criminal defense attorney who had been recommended by several neighbors. When I explained the situation, her response was immediate and encouraging. "Mr. Chen, what you are describing is not just property damage. This is criminal mischief, vandalism, and potentially conspiracy if she planned this sabotage in advance. The fact that her actions affected multiple households makes this even more serious. We need to file a police report immediately." Officer Janet Torres arrived at my house within 2 hours to take my statement and examine the evidence. She spent 3 hours reviewing my security footage, photographing the cut pipes, and documenting the scope of damage to my heating system. When she saw the video of Karen's midnight sabotage, her expression hardened. "This is pretty clear-cut criminal behavior," Officer Torres said. "Pardon the pun. The premeditation makes it worse. She researched your system, hired someone to locate the pipes, then deliberately destroyed them. That shows intent and planning." While Officer Torres filed her report, I began calculating the full financial impact of Karen's sabotage. The immediate repair costs were substantial, nearly $4,000 to excavate, replace the damaged sections, and pressure test the entire system. But that was just the beginning. Mrs. Peterson's medical costs provided the most heartbreaking evidence of Karen's impact. Without her heated floors, her arthritis had flared so severely that she required additional physical therapy and stronger pain medication. Her doctor's note clearly stated that the sudden loss of supplemental heat had worsened her condition significantly. The Johnson family had been forced to use expensive space heaters to keep their newborn's nursery warm, running up electrical bills that exceeded $300 in just 1 week. They also had to take time off work to stay home with their baby, who had developed a cold from sleeping in the suddenly frigid room. The Martinez family's situation was the most tragic. Maria's elderly father had developed pneumonia symptoms after spending several nights in a cold room during his cancer recovery. The emergency room visit and additional medications cost over $800 that the family could not afford. Even the Henderson family, who had never complained about anything, documented how the loss of their basement heating had caused a pipe to freeze and burst, flooding their laundry room and destroying personal belongings. In total, Karen's 4 minutes of midnight vandalism had caused over $15,000 in direct damages and collateral costs to 5 families in our neighborhood. But the evidence against Karen extended far beyond the financial impact. As I investigated further, I discovered that Karen herself was guilty of numerous HOA violations that she had been hiding while harassing me about imaginary infractions. Her architectural improvements to her Victorian house included an unpermitted deck addition that extended into the required setback area. Her fence modifications violated the height restrictions clearly outlined in our community covenants. Most ironically, Karen had installed outdoor lighting that was far brighter than HOA standards allowed, creating the exact type of neighborhood disturbance she had accused me of causing. The paper trail of Karen's harassment campaign provided additional evidence of her systematic abuse of her HOA position. I had saved every violation notice, every threatening email, and every documentation request she had made over the past 4 months. The pattern showed clear targeting and escalation that went far beyond legitimate community oversight. Mike Rodriguez, Karen's handyman, agreed to provide a sworn statement about his role in locating my heating pipes. His testimony would prove that Karen's sabotage was premeditated and carefully planned, not a moment of anger or frustration. But the most satisfying evidence came from the neighborhood itself. As word spread about what Karen had done, residents began coming forward with their own stories of her harassment and intimidation tactics. The Wilsons, who had initially supported Karen's complaints about my system, were horrified to learn that their new HOA president was a criminal who had hurt elderly and sick neighbors. Mr. Phillips, who had attended meetings to voice concerns about my unauthorized equipment, publicly apologized and offered to testify on my behalf. By Friday afternoon, I had compiled a comprehensive case that would ensure Karen faced both criminal charges and civil liability for her actions. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses were credible, and the damages were documented down to the penny. But I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted Karen to face the judgment of the community she had tried to manipulate and control. I wanted every neighbor to see exactly what kind of person they had elected as their HOA president. Most importantly, I wanted Karen to understand that attacking good people who contribute to their community comes with consequences that extend far beyond anything she could have imagined. The emergency HOA meeting I requested for Saturday evening was standing room only. Word had spread throughout Maplewood Heights about Karen's sabotage, and nearly every homeowner in our community wanted to hear the full story. The tension in the community center was electric as neighbors filed in, many of them carrying printed emails I had sent summarizing the evidence against our HOA president. Karen arrived 15 minutes late, probably hopping to make a dramatic entrance. Instead, she walked into a room full of neighbors who stared at her with expressions ranging from disappointment to outright disgust. Her usual confident stride faltered as she realized that everyone already knew what she had done. I had requested the first speaking slot on the agenda, and I used every minute of my allotted time to present the evidence methodically and completely. I started with the security camera footage, playing the video on the community center's projection screen so everyone could see Karen's midnight crime in clear detail. The room was completely silent as the infrared footage showed Karen digging up my heating line and sawing through the copper pipe. When the video ended, you could have heard a pin drop. Several neighbors were shaking their heads in disbelief. "This is what your HOA president did at 2:43 a.m. on Tuesday night," I said, pointing to the frozen image of Karen walking away from her sabotage. She deliberately destroyed a heating system that 5 families in this neighborhood depend on to stay warm and comfortable. I then presented the testimony from Mike Rodriguez about Karen's premeditated plan to locate my heating pipes. I showed photographs of the precise damage and read the sworn statements from affected neighbors describing how Karen's crime had impacted their families. When I described Mrs. Peterson's worsened arthritis and the Martinez family's elderly father developing pneumonia symptoms, several neighbors began crying. These were not abstract legal concepts or property disputes. These were real people suffering real consequences because of Karen's selfish actions. The total documented damages from Mrs. Morrison's criminal vandalism exceed $15,000, I announced. But the real cost cannot be measured in money. She attacked the most vulnerable members of our community, the elderly, the sick, and a newborn baby, all to serve her own jealousy and greed. I concluded my presentation by revealing Karen's secret plan to force me to sell my house so she could buy it at below market value. The audible gasps from the audience showed that even her remaining supporters were shocked by the scope of her deception. Then it was Karen's turn to respond. What followed was one of the most spectacular public meltdowns I have ever witnessed. Karen began by denying everything, claiming the security footage was somehow fabricated and that Mike Rodriguez was lying to protect himself. But as community members began asking pointed questions, her story fell apart completely. "Mrs. Morrison," asked Janet Murphy from Oak Street, "if you did not cut Mr. Chen's heating line, how do you explain the video evidence showing you at the exact location at the exact time?" Karen's response was to attack me personally. "David Chen has been harassing me for months with his illegal heating system. He has made my life miserable with his constant violations of community standards. I was just trying to protect our neighborhood property values." The room erupted. Mrs. Peterson, despite her arthritis pain, stood up to address Karen directly. "You nearly put me in the hospital," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I could not walk for 3 days because of what you did. How dare you claim you were protecting this neighborhood when you hurt the people who live in it?" Karen's response revealed her true character completely. Instead of showing remorse or taking responsibility, she doubled down on her attacks. "Maybe if people in this neighborhood followed the rules instead of installing unauthorized equipment, we would not have these problems," she snapped. "I am the HOA president, and I was elected to enforce our community standards, not to coddle people who think they are above the law." The neighborhood's response was swift and unanimous. Tom Henderson made a motion to immediately remove Karen from her position as HOA president. The motion was seconded by 6 different people simultaneously. When the vote was called, the result was overwhelming. 43 neighbors voted to remove Karen from office, with 0 votes supporting her and only Karen herself abstaining. But the meeting was not over. Officer Torres, who had been waiting outside, entered the community center as the vote concluded. She approached Karen with an arrest warrant for criminal mischief and vandalism. "Mrs. Morrison, you are under arrest for the deliberate destruction of property belonging to multiple homeowners. You have the right to remain silent." As Karen was read her rights in front of the entire neighborhood, her facade of authority and respectability crumbled completely. The woman who had spent months harassing me about imaginary violations was being arrested for actual crimes that had hurt innocent people. The silence in the room as Karen was escorted out in handcuffs was profound. This was not a moment of celebration or revenge. It was the sad conclusion to a situation that never should have happened. A community leader had betrayed the trust of the people she was supposed to serve, and everyone felt the weight of that betrayal. But as I looked around the room at my neighbors, people who had rallied together to support the victims of Karen's crimes and hold her accountable for her actions, I felt something more powerful than anger or vindication. I felt hope that our community would emerge from this crisis stronger and more united than ever before. 3 months later, Maplewood Heights felt like a completely different neighborhood. The heating system was fully operational again, warming homes and bringing comfort to the families who depended on it. But more importantly, Our community had learned important lessons about leadership, accountability, and standing up for what is right. Corinne's legal troubles resolved quickly once she realized the overwhelming evidence against her. Faced with security camera footage, witness testimony, and documented damages exceeding $15,000, she accepted a plea agreement rather than risk a trial. She was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution to all affected families. The restitution payments covered every penny of damage Corinne had caused. Mrs. Peterson received compensation for her additional medical expenses and physical therapy. The Johnson family was reimbursed for their emergency heating costs and lost wages. The Martinez family got money to cover their father's emergency room visit and medications. Even the Henderson family received payment for their burst pipe and flood damage. But Corinne's financial penalties were nothing compared to the social consequences of her actions. Word of her criminal behavior spread quickly through Maplewood Heights and the surrounding communities. Her reputation as a neighborhood bully and saboteur made it impossible for her to continue living comfortably in our area. 6 weeks after her arrest, Corinne put her Victorian house on the market. She moved out of state before the sale was finalized, leaving behind the community she had tried to manipulate and control. The irony was not lost on anyone that Corinne had planned to force me to sell my house, but ended up having to sell her own instead. The new family that bought Corinne's house, the Thompsons, are everything she was not. They introduced themselves to every neighbor, volunteered for community projects, and even asked if their property could be connected to my heating system. I was happy to extend the network to include their home, bringing the total number of connected houses to 6. Mrs. Peterson's recovery was the most heartwarming aspect of our neighborhood's healing process. With her heated floors restored and her medical expenses covered, her mobility and comfort improved dramatically. She sent me a thank you card every month for the first year, thanking me not just for the heating system, but for standing up to Corinne's bullying. The Johnson baby, now a healthy toddler, takes his first steps on the warm floors that keep his nursery comfortable year-round. The Martinez family's elderly father completed his cancer treatment successfully, and the gentle heat in his room helped him stay comfortable throughout his recovery. Our community also implemented new HOA policies to prevent future abuse of power. Board members now face term limits, major decisions require community approval, and there are clear procedures for reporting harassment or misconduct by elected officials. The experience taught all of us that communities are stronger when they work together to protect their most vulnerable members. Corinne's attempt to divide and intimidate us ultimately brought us closer together and made us more vigilant about holding our leaders accountable. As I write this story, my heating system continues to warm 6 homes in Maplewood Heights. It represents everything Corinne tried to destroy: cooperation, innovation, and genuine care for your neighbors. But it also represents something Corinne never understood. When you attack good people who contribute to their community, that community will stand together to defend what is right. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting justice run its course, while continuing to be the kind of person who makes the world a little bit warmer for everyone around them.